Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. Kristina Durante. She is an evolutionary psychologist and professor of marketing department vice chair, and the marketing Ph.D. program coordinator at Rutgers Business School. And today we're going to focus basically on female evolved psychology and some of the trade-offs when it comes to decisions between career and family that females have to do in the modern industrialized society. So, Dr. Durante, thank you for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited and happy to be here.
So, let's see, where should we start? Historically speaking, in ancient societies, and we're probably talking here about forager societies, how important was it for females to secure a partnership with a man and why?
So, when pair bonds evolved, which was millions of years ago, so
Yeah.
it's not the most anciently evolved mating system that humans would be pair bonded, but it did evolve because, so yes, it's important. This is why, people care about forming, that's why we form pair bonds today. And the evolution of pair bonds really came about because, believe it or not, it all comes back to cranial capacity and the birth canal. So what happened was when humans evolved bigger brains and they needed more cranial capacity for that big brain, and still be able to pass through the birth canal, human babies evolved to be much more, basically they came out uncooked. So they weren't fully developed, and when human babies are born, they can't do much. They're helpless. So in order for human babies to survive, and reproduction is the engine of natural selection, so we need them to survive, they were highly dependent on their caregivers, predominantly the mother, who needed to be constantly caring for this little helpless child, basically tethered to a home base to care for the baby and feed the baby through her body. And so biologically, women were constrained to basically set all these little helpless babies up for success. So we needed help on the home front and shelter and protection. And so what we do know is that men were not having babies, and so they were more free to go do other things, like find food and provide protection and shelter and so forth. So the desire to pair bond is fairly deeply rooted, and it all comes back to babies needing to be born relatively helpless to be able to grow that big brain outside of the womb and have human women still be able to walk around upright, and give birth at the same time. So it ironically it all comes back to that, but the importance of it is strong, and that's why we have the desire to find partners.
But what was really the role played by the father? Because, I mean, there are people that say basically something along the lines of what you just said, that it was basically to provide shelter and resources and all those kinds of things for the baby to grow up healthy. But there are people that sort of question that and say that the primary function would be to prevent infanticide by other males, for example, and because we also have things like cooperative breeding, that perhaps the role of the father was not really that important when it comes to providing resources, for example. So, what do you think about that?
So I definitely think so. If the mother's not around, it's all but certain death for a baby. If the father is not around, that's not necessarily the case. So there
Hmm.
is that difference. And
Yeah.
as populations began to grow, the problem with infanticide and wanting to know that the children, for men, the children that you're investing in are yours, because that is a problem that men have that women don't, is there's always the question of paternity certainty, and so I think that's really what gave birth to marriage, which isn't a mating system, it's just a social construct. So, agriculture, and then populations begin to grow, and then wealth is inherited through bloodlines, and then you've got to be sure that the baby is yours. So, yeah, there are many factors, and I think like the spawn or the catalyst was, now we have like really tiny babies that need all hands on deck to make sure they survive, and other folks to go get food and bring it back. So there was that, resource allocation, but then there are the other factors there, which, sort of forged that the mating system that we have today, and then eventually the social contract of marriage.
And marriage, in this case, we're really talking for most of our evolutionary history about arranged marriages, correct?
I think so. Surely, if we turn the clock back, our kin networks had more of a hand in, who we married, and, we were in small groups of individuals, many of whom that we were, related to. And so, arranged marriages, it was a cultural thing, and I think it was more widespread many years ago, but it's still around in many cultures, and even in Western societies, parents and extended family and grandparents weigh in on, on their favorites, certainly about who you should be marrying. And for and again, this goes back to populations getting large, inherited wealth, and all these, things that play a role in how, in the partnerships that we develop.
Yes, I asked you about that because I was also trying to get at where does the importance that society usually attributes to marriage and family for women stem from.
For women? So there are a lot of factors, I think, more than one. So, I don't think that marriage is just something that was arranged, that was sort of like came to be for women. Um,
Yeah.
but it certainly helps control fertility. So I think I think marriage is mostly for men.
To
So
secure paternity certainty.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And there are other factors too. It's like, if you can't be, you know, there are negative consequences to, highly promiscuous sexual strategies when you're living in amongst large populations of people, and then you're
Yeah.
strangers. And so it benefits you to be married and pool resources, for a number of different reasons, and these are all, one of them. But yeah, paternity certainty is a big one. And, if you have a partnership, especially a social contract, and, that person, lives with you and you provide provisioning, you can, have more knowledge of that person's whereabouts, and that person is dependent on you, and that really helps up the probability that any children born in that union are going to be yours. So yeah, I mean, I think marriage is, again, not a mating system, a construct, and I think it benefits men more than it benefits women. But we can't say that it totally doesn't benefit women, because even today, I have to say, it really helps to have another adult around to help a household run.
Yeah, but in terms of social norms, I mean, it's very common nowadays to hear from women. I mean, they basically complain if they invest more on career than family. Hearing complaints from other people, particularly family, friends, and other close ones, saying that I mean, basically blaming them for not investing more on family and not being
Yes,
married and all of that
yes,
kind of thing. Perhaps
yeah,
single men also hear a
yeah,
little bit of that, but I mean, there's a lot of
yeah.
complaint coming from women. So I was trying to get at there being sort of social norms surrounding
Oh, okay.
those
Yeah. So
institutions. So,
yes. So the social norms are and the cultural norms are very deeply rooted to they've been around forever. We're passing this, norms and the social values from generation to generation, even when we're not explicitly passing them on. We are telling, our girls learn how valuable it is for them to be nurturing and empathetic and start a family and have babies and take the role of the caregiver, uh, and the husband or your partner would take the role of the breadwinner, because that's how it was for years, because there was no birth control, there was no family planning. So again, women were the ones having the babies, and they were the ones feeding the babies through their body. I mean, formula is relatively, recent invention, so babies had to be fed. Women were, to a certain extent, tethered to a home base. And so the person who wasn't having the babies the partner in the relationship who wasn't having the babies could go in and bring, and bring the money in to support the running of the household. And so, it actually, was working, pretty well, except for, the fact that, boys and girls are born with interests of all sorts, and sky's the limit, and sort of the default is I'm a human being who has these goals and curiosity and interest, and I want to build a career. And then the social values and the norms step in, and girls learn very early on their value. And when we learn what we're going to be valued for in our society, we follow suit. It makes really great sense, not just, evolutionarily, yes, but, for our own, success in life, to go where we're valued. And so, our brains come equipped to learn what we're valued for. And, there's individual differences, but on the average, we follow what we're going to be most successful at, and girls learn that that's caregiver.
But with the availability of contraceptives and safe abortion, of course, it depends on the country we're talking about, and unfortunately now in the US, perhaps not so much anymore, unfortunately, at least in some states. But I mean, do those things also factor into women's decisions when it comes to following a career path or investing more on family? Because I mean, since these are, from an evolutionary perspective, novel
Right.
things, novel technologies, do they really, I mean, is it something that their brains process when it comes to decision making about this?
Yeah, and I think so, because we have, this sort of analytical part of our brain that can produce all these workarounds and know that we still want a career and we still desire a career. And from the research, we know that women do. But there's, we're still a society that, even implicitly values one thing versus the other thing from women versus men. So even though, like you said, we have contraceptives and we have, family planning, and in many areas, availability of, getting safe abortions, women can, find a workaround and make a plan to have babies later in life, even if the desire and, motivation is still there. The contraceptives did wonders for women's, movement into their careers and in the workforce. And, now there's more women on college campuses than there are men. This year's MBA cohort at Wharton, there's more women. So, women, when they can take advantage of opportunities to grow their career and build wealth, they're doing it now, I guess, which raises a whole nother conversation about, how that might disrupt, our social norms and the behaviors of partnerships, how we form them, and men and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so contraceptives is relatively new, at least in terms of how brain evolution, and we haven't caught up. So there's still, the desire and the value to start a family.
Would you say that there's good evidence that women really have this natural impulse to wanting children?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because to get children, you don't have to want them. You just have to desire sex, and most of
Mm,
us do.
yeah.
So sex is the path to children. And so I know there's been research that finds that girls have a more interest in infants, animals, and babies than boys do when looking at children. And then as they become adolescents, and puberty hits, and that gender difference wanes a little bit, I think because of all the hormones. And one thing that I've found in my research that looks at women's hormonal profiles across the ovulatory cycle,
Mhm.
when women are ovulating and their sex hormone estrogen is really high, they're not interested in infants at all. So you might think like, oh, when women can become pregnant, they should really love babies. Well, they do not, but they're very interested in sex. And so it's kind of like putting the chicken before the egg. It's like the you know the any I don't know if there is like sort of a lot of people saying, oh, well, women are just naturally more interested in babies and they want to have them. I think that's more learned about what you're valued for. Because when we look at the sex hormones, they're not leading to interest in infants. They're leading to interest in sex, which begets children. And then certainly when women become pregnant, progesterone is high when they have the babies. There are certain other hormones that come online that lead women and motivate women to caregive all animals. So progesterone, oxytocin, and you see this little baby, you have the hormones that lead you to want to just take care of it. So then we would see a difference, postnatally, and when women are pregnant. I bet you if you measured interest in infants, then you'd see a difference.
Yeah. So I mean, in recent years, and perhaps this is people that are more on the conservative side of the political aisle misrepresenting evolutionary psychology in their favor. I've been hearing lots of people saying that it's inevitable that at least at a certain point in their life, women will want to have kids. Some people say that they like hit 30 at most, and then this sudden uncontrollable impulse kicks in, and they just, if they're following a career path, they just want to drop the career and invest all in family and in having kids and all of that. But is that really an accurate representation of what happens?
I don't know that it is. Now, there's individual differences for everything. So there are women out there who don't want children and they will never want children. But
Mhm.
going back to how the brain is designed to interpret what we see is socially valued in our environments. So our environments shape, the expression of many of our genes, including our behaviors when we learn that, to be successful in life in the environment that I was born in, it seems to be that children and families and getting married is highly valued. And so that can shift your motivation, even without you necessarily being, consciously aware of how things in your environment are affecting you, because your brain is categorizing it and you might not even be consciously aware of it, even from, the time kids are born. And we talk about, and we just sort of even implicitly, like even just a body movement that says, ah, wow, you're playing with a doll. And so this is important also. And I think that that plays a large role in it. But again, there are individual differences, and I'd say that the bell curves that separate men and women when it comes to desire for family and children are a lot closer than people might think. So I think that there's more similarity there than difference. But certainly, once women decide to have a family and start having children, as I mentioned before, there are very important hormones that kick in that do shift motivation towards wanting to stay home and care for your babies. That's a maternal instinct that is as more ancient than pair bonds. So there is that. And so then many women face like this that trade-off of, wow, I have this, like, I really want to be home with my kids because I have, all of this internal physiology to do it, but what you feel is that you want to be home. And then you have this job that you want to be high performing at, and you can't do both at the same time at a high level. And so then what do you do? So women feel this push pull, and they also feel, guilty for trading off family or career, family for career.
Aren't these decisions people make also influenced by culture and social norms surrounding sexual division of labor?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, because we are a culture, as, much as, some people like to think we're not, we still are, that values, women as home tenders and men as breadwinners. That's the default, and anything that is like been going on for years and years feels safe, and that's what we do. And so, like I said before, there's a lot of societal and cultural pressure to do that. And I know from some of the research that we looked at that even in self-reports of couples where women are the breadwinner, this is thousands of couples reporting like who's the breadwinner. Only 38% in a full sample of couples where the woman was earning more actually said, my wife earns more. This is the women and the men. Because and women who are working put more time into caregiving and home tending than do women who are stay-at-home moms, and they're doing more than women did in the 1960s. So there's a lot of guilt around that. And so, when the reason that nobody's reporting that women are the breadwinners, it's that guilt. It's like it's coming up against the social values. And and what we know from surveys is that you want to socially report in a desirable way. And so, that's what we're seeing. So yeah, there's this pressure, and we're built to adhere to what's valued in our environment.
But could it also have something to do with the fact that if men stayed more at home and worked less, and I mean dedicate themselves more to raising children, that women or not many women would be open to put up with it?
Oh, to put up with oh, I see what you're saying. So, yes. So I think what you're saying is if women have husbands that are stay-at-home husbands,
Yeah.
that they somehow become less attractive to them
Yeah,
because
exactly. Yeah,
women
that's what I'm saying.
women don't want men who stay. Yeah. So, that's kind of a little bit of a conundrum because what we know is that, having help at home is very good for, women's well-being and, certainly the family career trade-off. Women are happier and more productive in their careers when their partner helps out more at home. But what we also know is that, it can cause discord at home. For the reason that I think you were alluding to, which is that even though women want help at home, we still have attraction to men who are, charismatic and socially dominant and, all of those features that led to, optimal mate choice for all of those thousands of years of human history where there was no birth control, there was no family planning. So we needed a really the best male we could get to help with resources and protection. And so we still have that. And so I think that there is, some deep-seated, conflict that happens when you have a man who, you're working and they're staying at home. And I think that creates a lot of conflict over, unpaid labor disputes, or, I'm doing all this, so you're more mindful of what the other person's bringing to the table because it conflicts with your deep-seated, desires for attractive partners. So yes, that is a problem, to be overcome, for sure. And, men who stay at home, they tend to spend more time on more masculine, home tasks like yard work. and other things, and they might say, well, and maybe they're particularly good at it, fixing things around the house, and mowing the lawn, less laundry, less dishes, less, all of those things are still left for the woman who is not the stay-at-home, so, and then that creates, you know disputes and discord. So yeah, that's sort of like the flip side to, yes, having more hands on deck at home is going to help women in their careers, but then it's going to create some discord at home. So, being aware of this can help, but it's, I guess, something to be mindful of.
Do you have any idea if countries that are higher in the gender equality index, I mean, in those countries, people are more accepting of these sort of role reversals where men would be more at home and
Yeah.
women would be more investing in their careers, for example?
Yeah, so there are not a lot of societies that are matrilineal, but those that are, the women are more, socially dominant, and they tend to be more, aggressive, and that's, it's kind of reversed. But there are not many of those. So let's talk about what you're talking about, which is, countries that are more egalitarian. And
Yeah.
yes, when social values change and you see other men who are, contributing as much as, maybe more than, women to, taking care of things at home. Uh, you know, this is one thing that we've been trying to talk about with companies, is having, their leadership team in the C-suite, especially the men, take advantage of these family leave programs and be participating in, paternal leave and other kinds of things. Because as we see that, this is, kind of how the way society is going, then, there's less discord, because this is now socially valued, and, my neighbor has that set up, and the person across the street has that set up. And so, it's, slowly this would start to change here too. So I think, that attitudes shift as norms shift.
Does this trade-off between career and family for women in modern industrialized societies, is it influenced by sex ratios, for example?
So that was one thing that I looked at a few years ago, and I was basically just interested in why some women want really high demanding, high paying careers and others don't. So basically just interested in why people choose certain careers. And I did look into sex ratio, because sex ratio changes the competitive landscape for the sex that's in overabundance. So what we found was that when there were more women than there were men, the women became more ambitious, and they were not only desiring more high demand C-suite level careers, or lawyer, surgeon, the careers we think of as like highly demanding. You need a lot of investment to get there in terms of education and time. But then there's this great payoff, but you're also working all the time. More women desired those. And when we looked at it, with demographics, we saw that, if the areas in the country where there are fewer men, sure enough, more women are in these positions. And, that's just correlational. But when women get a sense of there's a lot of competition around, not only is there, there's just more intersexual competition, women competing with each other. And so they become, a little bit more aggressive in their competition, but they also become more ambitious and are more likely to want to trade off, career at that point for family. It's in the research, we kind of called it, I don't like that we called it so much this anymore, but it's sort of like Plan B. So, there's not a lot of men, and you're fighting for the few very good men who are there, and so you might be you might end up needing to get your own resources. So whatever the resource acquisition strategy is in your environment, you're going to move toward that. And, kind of, with a lot of motivation and ambition, and that's what we found. And I think, so there's even species of fish that, like, if the males are gone, like, some females will become males, and we don't do that. But what it is like, now women are sort of free to express their dominance,
Hmm.
in some ways, because there's not as many men, and might not get a partner, so you have to become your own protector.
Yeah. But wait a minute, if the sex ratio is really too skewed and there's very few men out there, for example, after a war, which is common for men
Mm-hmm.
to really drop in numbers,
Hmm.
is there any change in terms of how demanding women become when it comes to the traits they look for in a partner? Because since there are really very few men they can mate with.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So if you're asking, do mate preferences change when sex ratio is skewed? So when there are a few men, women probably lower the bar a little bit when it
Hmm.
comes to long-term mates.
Yeah.
Short-term mates, we're kind of always, we want the best because there's no investment. So you might as well shoot for the stars. But for somebody who's really going to invest with you in you as a partner and maybe select you as their partner and help, pool resources and all that great stuff, then you might have to lower your what you desire in a mate. Your standards might have to come down a little bit for sure. But yeah, that's a good point. So after World War II, a lot of women were in the workforce, and then once the population of men, came back from all the men that were lost in war, then that started to change again, and more men than women. But you know, but I'm really interested in how the landscape is going to change now that more women are on college campuses, and that's got to net out in some way to some interesting changes with marriage rates and many other things too. So we'll see.
I mean, that bit about education, is it because since women are getting more and more educated than men, then for at least in their perspective, there will be less available partners that fulfill their requirements?
Right. So yeah, so that creates a problem. So are women, all of these highly educated women, are are they going to be okay with a partner who is like a blue collar worker, or earns less than them, or and I guess that, who knows? I mean, some will predict no. So what's going to happen? There's going to be all these single men, and I know there's some evolutionary psychologists doing research on the men who can't find mates, which creates a huge problem. I mean, talking about another, reason that marriages, are beneficial is that, we have most men become mated, and that's a good thing.
Mm.
Because otherwise, if they remain single and frustrated, and that's a real big deficit to well-being, and can create problems potentially. But yeah, so yeah, you're right on the nose there. Yeah, it creates a problem though. So are their standards going to change for marriage? Who they marry? I don't know.
Do you think that that would be one of the reasons why there's been this recent trend where we find uh, women that are single in their 40s, for example, and stuff like that?
Yeah, so women are delaying marriage, is happening later, for
Hmm.
men and for women. And again, it's one of these problems or issues, not, I don't want to call it a problem, but one of these things that has many factors contributing to it. So, you know, uh, social media is I don't know if we give it enough credit for causing as many problems as it causes, but one of the things is that it gives this impression that there are lots of opportunities around, for potential partners. Online dating has opened things up so much, and at some level, our brain is categorizing all these people on our social network or social media, even if it's not like the closest friend of ours, as somebody who's in our group, whose opinion of us matters and who we could potentially have as a mate. And so, there's that question of opportunity costs. So for men, I think maybe that weights a little bit more heavily, but for women too. So, that is also a factor in, I think, waiting and not feeling as much pressure. You feel like there is opportunity, even if it's sort of a false sense, and maybe you get old enough and then, it hasn't worked out, or, and women have so much opportunity to build their own wealth. And when women build their own wealth, you call the shots more. And, there are some women who don't want to be married and they don't want children, and they can build wealth on their own. But yeah, I think that all of these factors that we're talking about come into play. It's just a matter of to what degree.
Do you think that in modern industrialized societies there's good opportunity and incentive for women to invest both in their career and family?
That's a good question. So I think for people who have means, that the answer is yes. So if you are making enough money, if you come from a good family support system, especially if you're living near family, or come from a family of means where your parents have money, then then this is so much easier what we're talking about, because you can outsource a lot of the care that you need at home, and free up there's still going to be marital discord, but you could free up that. One thing that we found during the pandemic is that, so everybody was at home, and now men had a front row seat to what needs to get done to really make a household run. And so they were doing more at home. And what we found is that men were reporting, for example, in one of our surveys, that they were doing 5 hours of childcare each day. So these are married men who have children. And there's pretty much no way, somebody who works full time is going to be contributing 5 hours. That was higher than what the moms were reporting. So what we know is that this is not true. It's an overperception, but it's something that we see when somebody goes from essentially zero to, a little bit more. That weight feels heavier than somebody who was bearing the brunt, and then maybe it goes up a little bit. So men were like, oh my God, I'm doing so much. And women were like, they're not doing anything. So this goes back to the discord that, that we can see in marriages. And I know we're talking about what happens in the pandemic, and I kind of got off your original question, but that was one thing that we found happened as a result of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. But I think we've already touched on this issue a little bit before, but are women happier if they get the chance to seek career goals?
Oh, yeah, yes. Okay, yeah. So women of means have that trade-off is a lot easier if you have resources, whether it's through your own money or your parents' money, and you have support systems, especially if you live near family. And, but, I think the answer is yes, but again, you need that sort of cushion to be able to do it, because you cannot do everything well all of the time. So this idea that women can have it all, or that anybody can have it all, is false, because there are always trade-offs in everything that we do. But yes, I think women, it's better for their psychological well-being if they can, because print is, boys and girls are equally curious about all things in the world, and they have, all, different kinds of goals in life. And then, then we have this, but, the other thing for you women is caregiving. So what we also see in the research is that when women know that nobody's going to see their answers, they're equally as ambitious as men. And so that sort of that's there for them. Again, a bell curve, but it's there for them in more so than I think we give it credit for. So to answer your question, yes, I think many women would have would feel better and have higher psychological well-being if they were able to pursue their own, goals and career as well as have a family. We all want it all, right? But we have to be able to, make the trade-offs, and sometimes we can't do both at the same time.
So, I mean, when people answer these surveys, and even when it comes to the decisions they make in their lives, they are very influenced by social norms, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If we look at conditions that are private versus public, in public we see like these huge gender differences. That means that many women are doing what's socially desirable.
Hmm.
And because in private it changes. And so, which to me is kind of, it's a little bit sad. But yeah, I mean, women know that they face this trade-off and more than men, because we're valued for, we're kind of expected to do it all, be like these great moms and then the great career and, and get everything done. And we put the pressure on ourselves. So it's not just like, oh, the patriarchy and men are just putting all these demands on us. Surely that's there, but we put the pressure on ourselves to do everything all the time. That's why we see, women are so burnt out, because, working women are actually doing more at home because of most likely feeling guilty about being at work all day. So they're putting in more hours, and that's not sustainable. So, women's well-being is, everybody's well-being is, there's this surge in like, stress management, managing burnout, emotional wellness. And I think because, we just have such high demands on ourselves, and especially women.
So, I mean, there's certainly something to the complaints put forth by feminists when it comes to the burdens women have to deal with in modern society when it comes to managing their careers, family, etc. I mean, it's not just, we can just dismiss it like some people that are more conservative do and say that they are just coming up with a sort of patriarchy boogeyman and or anything like that, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think, and yeah, if your way of life is different from the way of life of people living in, cities far away from you, you're going to protect attitudes and values that are aligned with your way of life
Mm.
and the way life works for you. Because why disrupt the system? And so yeah, I think people who are more conservative, maybe they might say that, things work better when a man is at work and a woman is at home, or they think that, the women who, think that they can't have it all or manage their careers are wrong, but maybe that's because, I don't know. But yeah, so I think that, you just can't do it all at the same time. These values in life, what we kind of call the fundamental motivations, you have to, throughout human evolutionary history, we have to trade off because we only have a certain amount of resources and energy to give. And so, if you're doing one thing really well, that means you're not doing some other fundamental motive like parenting really well. If you're doing your status driving really well, or you're doing your mating really well, you're not doing your parent. It's just, we're constantly making these trade-offs. But I think, yeah, if the mating system around you is different, you're gonna, adhere to, if you're a married woman, you're going to support values that are aligned with the way that you live your life and protect that. And so I think that's what creates a difference between what I guess we would consider more liberal and more conservative when it comes to women in the workforce and feminism and, not being married or whatever it is that we're talking about.
So we've already touched a little bit on the pandemic, but I've seen some data that points to the fact that it seems that women have been hit harder than men when it comes to their job and career prospects, particularly more so people who have low wage jobs. Is that right?
Yes. So as soon as the pandemic was upon us, my colleagues and I knew that women were going to be hit hard because now everybody's at home and they're the default caregiver, and and they're more likely, as you said, to be in low wage earning jobs. That many were cut, so were more likely to be unemployed too, and at home. So yeah, the pandemic hit women hard. And, so we did find a little bit in our research some silver linings, but I don't want to make it seem like it was so glorious, the pandemic for women, because it wasn't. It just, the one, we found some silver lining in, for women in couples that both were working, working from home during the pandemic and doing telework. We found that when the man was contributing more at home, that this was having positive effects on women's satisfaction with their work and their career, and their productivity too, which makes sense. But that's not for every, that wasn't happening for every household. So it was just the ones where men were picking up a little bit more of the slack than they otherwise were. And then, of course, men saw what it takes to run a household. And so, at least now they're aware that, these things kind of happen magically. We don't write down exactly what we do every day around the house. Oh, I picked up these socks and then I cleaned washed the table down, and then we don't write that down. So, this is where, taking partners for granted comes in, and these disputes on unpaid labor. And I think men now saw some of that, unpaid labor that goes undetected sometimes. And so that was a good thing. But yeah, women, took the brunt of it in terms of economically and with, more work at home and kids being home. And hopefully that's come up a little bit, and, now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, but even if men saw some of that work that women do at home that is unpaid, and even if that could have had some positive effect, do you think that generally speaking, the pandemic still had negative impacts on families?
Yeah, I think so. Because yeah, men are aware of it, I guess, but I think I think it caused more of it. It raised to the surface these arguments about who's doing what. And when money's tight, that adds more conflict. So yeah, I think there was, I don't know for sure, and maybe Ricardo, if the divorce rates increased, but I think that they did during the pandemic.
Last time I saw, I think they did, yes. At least I was following it more at the beginning, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and you're just around to, argue about these, these things, and going back to, our mating system, if we go like really far back, our attraction mechanisms don't actually match, who actually nets out to be a good long-term partner for us. So, they're two different things, and sometimes we're not always mated with the person we're most attracted to, and sometimes we are mated with the person that we're most attracted to, and they're not really good at helping us around the house, So, you know, there's I think about human mating and, all of these workarounds that had to be found as we evolved, and, all of these things that we want in an absolute optimal mate, we don't get. And so it's hard to stay with the same person, for many, many years. We're not
Yeah.
really built for it. So it takes a lot of, it takes a lot of that prefrontal cortex intellectualizing and finding workarounds and reframes for situations, right? To stay
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. So, just one last topic. Do you think that knowing all of these, I mean, with having all of this knowledge coming from evolutionary psychology, particularly about female psychology, that it could help females in particular dealing with these modern trade-off that they have to make between family and career when they have to make it? Okay, so that would
Yeah.
be one question, and then I will ask
Okay.
another.
Okay, yeah, I think absolutely. And this applies to, the way we eat too. We know that French fries are bad. We don't eat them as much and we can try to control that. It's always good to have the information. So I think, the more that women, know about this and learn that, nobody can do it all. And we have, even if you tell yourself, I'm not falling for society's pressure of how I'm valued, you're wired to pay attention to what you're valued for. Your brain is wired that way. So, whether you like it or not, many of us do sort of keep that in the background. And, we know if we know that we, might be overcompensating around the house and doing more than what we should be doing as career women. Like I said before, women who are working outside the home tend to put in more hours at home because
Yeah.
of the guilt.
Hmm.
Then we can sort of say, okay, well, maybe we can, just keep track of what I'm doing, just to make sure that, I'm aware of the pressure that I'm putting on myself. And, I can make an effort to schedule my time and make an effort to build in time for my own rest and make an effort to build in time for, myself to do something outside of home and outside of work. That's so important to psychological well-being. And yes, otherwise we're just conflicted inside without knowing why we are. But now we know, and it makes life, a little bit easier. So
And
it helps.
yeah, and okay, my last question then, and since we talked a lot about social norms and how they impact people's decisions and psychology, what do you think about evolutionary psychology perhaps contributing to changing gender norms and these sort of like family career balance for men and women, and men and women accepting more certain changes when it comes to gender norms? Because I mean, uh, I've been talking over these 4+ years on the show with lots of evolutionary psychologists, and you seem to be very interested in what is universal about human psychology, and when it comes to mating, about mate preferences for men and women, and at least to a certain extent, when evolutionary psychologists talk about them, they seem to be sort of fixed and ancient and unchanged for the past, I don't know, 13,000 years or so since the
Yeah.
Stone Age. But I mean, there's also evidence that they seem to be a little bit more flexible than that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I kind of came up in evolutionary psychology at the beginning, it was kind of fixed. It was like, here's how we are. But that's also, what we learned was like the naturalistic fallacy, right? It's like what your gene codes for is exactly what you have to be, and men are this and women are that, and that's not necessarily the case. I think that we have to remember that our environments really guide our behavior.
Hmm.
And we're flexible to our environments. That's why a raccoon that lives in New Jersey looks very different from a raccoon that lives in Brazil,
Yeah.
because our environments shape the way that we live and the way that we, learn what's valuable. And so, yes, some of these proclivities are just so deep. Some of the things that we desire, we share with like pretty much all organisms. We got to reproduce. We got sex, we love it. Food, we love it. Resting, we love it. And so it's like so deeply ingrained. But other, other things we can learn. We sort of learn from what's valued in our environment, And it makes things a little bit easier. I'm not saying it's going to erase, these gender differences that keep popping up. There are many that we find over and over again, but you know, that's a reason why we have cultural differences because, there are certain things that are valued in one culture and not as much in another, and we learn that and we intrinsically embody it. It becomes part of our identity, and we sort of follow suit with that. So yes, if social norms can move in a certain direction and we see, like I said, like we see like men doing more at home, like high powered men taking advantage of you know stay at home benefits and all this kind of stuff, then maybe it would help ease ease the differences that we see in terms of, women feeling guilty about being in their career and men feeling ashamed about being at home. Because I guess that's one thing we didn't talk about either. It's like men don't want to, they don't feel that it's something that they should be doing.
Hmm.
Um, so it kind of has to start at the top of sort of the hierarchy ladder to show that we've got these like essentially like high status people that are really doing this, and then people feel like they have more license to, oh, okay, that's how we're doing it. So we do have that part of our brain where you know the part that sort of was built on top of what we had already because we became so social. We're tuned to what was happening socially, and is that in itself is pretty motivational too.
Yeah. So let's end the interview here then. Dr. Durante, just before we go, where can people find your work on the internet?
Okay, yes. So I'm at Rutgers Business School, so they can look me up and Google me there. KristinaDurante.com and at Kristina Durante on Twitter and at Kristina_Durante on Instagram.
Okay, great. So thank you so much again for taking the time to come on the show, and it's always a pleasure to everyone.
Yes, very, very much a pleasure for me too. Thank you, Ricardo.
Okay, so hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. To keep the channel sustainable, I would like to ask you to please visit my Patreon page and to consider making a pledge there. Any amount, even $1 per month, would already be a great help. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like, and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters, Karen Litske and Blanchett Perga Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Frederick Sunder, Ricardo Vladimiro, Greg Healy, Adam Castle, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wissel, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolfkin, Tim Hollis, Henry Kalenia, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, Dan Demetrio, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Colombo, Jorge Espinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Inguanzo, Michael Stormir, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Ugni, Alexander Dunbauer, Fergal Cusson, Evan Bodrenko, Al Herzog, Don Ross, Jonathan Librand, Oslan Bullitt, Nathan Nguyen, Stanton T, Samuel Correa, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, J.W., João Eira, Tom Hummel, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Eden Solon, Romain Roach, Dmitry Grigoriev, Diego Londonio Correa, Tom Roth, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavel Ostazewski, Nelek Bach, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Al Ortiz, Guy Madison, Gary G. Hellman, João Linhares, Lida Cosmides, Saima Afzal, Adrian Yegi, Nick Golden, Paulo Tolentino, João Barbosa, Jules Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Pons Cortez, Ursula Litske, Denise Cook, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, and Max Belby. My producers Izar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Staffinia, Ian Gilligan, Luís Caetano, Tom Vanagdam, Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, Vega Guidi, Sardas Francis, Thomas Trumbull, and Nuno Welder. And my executive producers Michel Rugieski, Rosie, James Pratt, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Codriano, and Bogdan Kanivets. Thank you for all.